Kei aku nui, kei aku rahi, e te ti e te tā. Tēnā koutou katoa. E mihi nunui ki ngā piko whata. E pupuri tonu ana ki te mana o te whenua. Ki ngā iwi o te rohe nei, kia kaha koutou, he mihi mahana kia koutou. Ki te minita, me ngā tō rangapū o te rā nei, tēnā koutou. Nau mai, haere mai ki te kōrero o te tau. E mihi mahana ki te manukura o te puna, kia Sinead Belcher, kia Maia, kia Kaha, kia Manawa Nui e hoa. Ngā manuhiri. Nau mai, haere mai, e he uria hau, ko Ngāti Kahungunu, me Ngāti Hene, me Rongo Whakaata. Ko Carmen Parahia hau, ko te Pautiaki Matua o te Puna. Thank you everyone for coming and visiting us today. I hope you got your claps and your cheers and your ready to go. But before we start, I just want to get us to sing a song, Te Aroha, together, to get us prepared and ready for our kōrero today. Te aroha, te whakapono, me te rangi mari e tātou tātou e. Te aroha, te whakapono, me te rangi mari e. Now I'm going to hand it over to our MC Hammer, Lee Piper.
Yes, thanks. Hello. Thanks, Carmen. I wouldn't say MC Hammer, but kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. As Carmen said, my name's Lee Piper. I'm the new head of rural at Stuff, and as Carmen also said, welcome to Central District Field Days and to Stuff's panel discussion today. I also would like to say ngā mai haere mai to local iwi, to local mayors, senior decision makers from rural businesses, and to our panel today, Damien O'Connor, Minister of Agriculture and Biosecurity and Land Information, Ian McKelvey, who's the National MP for Rangatiki, and also Mark Cameron, ACT spokesperson for Primary Industries and Regional Economic Development. So, in for a treat today, Stuff's political editor Luke Malpas will discuss the views and opportunities and challenges ahead for the ag sector. And as you all know, we've had significant challenges with natural disasters in our rural regions. So he'll ask what the future holds for those making a living on the land. Central Districts Field Days is New Zealand's largest regional ag event, and it's been a sought-out event for almost 30 years. Like many events, we were forced to cancel last year, so we know there are tens and thousands of people likely to attend, and the crowds have been great, and the weather's been good, a little bit blustery today, but it's been not too bad. Fantastic session lined up for you today. A few housekeeping messages. Phones on silent. As you've seen, we're live streaming today on stuff.co.nz, so if you could have those phones on silent, that'd be awesome. Fire exit, just there, really, just that way. And toilets, they're actually there, so if you want to go to the toilet, just go out there and either go round that way or round that way. So before we get into the panel discussion, I'd like to invite Stuff's Chief Executive, Sinead Belcher, to the stage to say a few words about our commitment to the rural sector.
Thank you, Lee. Kia ora everyone. Sorry, I just had to turn my phone off, which it was not off. Kia ora koutou. It is so good to be here, and thank you very much for coming out today and through the week to attend what we think of as New Zealand's very best agri event. I started my career in media as a rural reporter in North Canterbury for 3.5 years, and I still think of that as one of my very favourite times of my career. And I think often of the people I met, the stories I was able to tell, and the incredible places I went to as well, which is, you know, I never would have dreamed that I'd be here being able to sort of speak to you all from the position of being able to host and run this event for the rural community. I think that's sort of that background is one of the reasons I'm so pleased to sort of be able to say that, you know, alongside the event that we're launching, that we're running this week, that we have relaunched a really great new rural content initiative across Stuff and our mastheads. So I think one of the things we've heard a lot from the rural community in recent months is that they would like their voices and perspectives to be heard more around New Zealand, and they would like more content and more news specifically aimed for them and their communities as well. So from today, we have added a new rural section onto the homepage of Stuff, which we think will deliver to both of those. It will, bring your perspectives, your stories, your views and news to the rest of New Zealand, but it's actually designed mostly to be there to serve you and your communities with the news, information that's important to you, that matters to you, whether it's about the economy, it's about the great stories of innovation and things that people are doing, sort of latest trends, what's happening in trading, all sorts of things. And it's only the beginning of a whole suite of new products that we have coming out this year that are aimed at sort of serving the rural community and growing our audience. We already reach 87% of the rural community around New Zealand. We have been here for 160 years in one way or another. Some of our oldest mastheads are more than 160 years old, and they grew up in the towns that are now the heart of our rural sort of economy and communities, and we're really proud of that. That means we have more people and more newsrooms spread out all around the country, and their focus is able to be on getting out and really being there on the ground when it matters. We had the cyclone recently. As you all know, our rural sector was very, very badly affected by that, and one of the great things was being able to send out a whole team of journalists, videographers, photographers to be right there on the ground and telling those stories and bringing them back to our audience, both the Stuff audience in general and to the sort of almost 400,000 rural decision makers around the country to hear firsthand what was going on over there. So it's one of the reasons we were able to raise $4.5 million through our readers for the Red Cross and local Merrill Relief Funds, was the telling of those stories and being able to be out there on the ground. And it's also one of the reasons why I am so excited to be able to introduce a new initiative today that is aimed at financially supporting the rural sector. I am going to now ask Tania Houghton from Farmlands to come up and Federated Farmers National President Andrew Hoggard to come up and reveal what that initiative is, but we are very proud to be able to be part of that.
Thank you. Kia ora, everybody. For those of you who I haven't met, my name is Tania Houghton, and now it's going to rain, so let me know if you can't hear. So what we're really excited to let you know about today is a campaign that we're launching right this minute. It went live at 12 o'clock. It's called Post Your Support. And where has it come from? Well, it's come from the fact that we've spent time on the ground in the impacted areas. And we all know that one of the biggest things we need to be doing is helping get our rural communities, our farmers and growers back up and running as fast as we can. As well as that, we also need them to know that the entire country supports them and is behind them. So the initiative is not only about raising funds, and I'm trying to talk louder and louder, it's also actually about showing that we care. So what we've done is this campaign is for the ability to donate for $20 a post. And $20 is roughly enough to get a metre of fencing up and running. Now, we pitched the idea to Federated Farmers, and Andrew's going to talk in a minute, who jumped in and came on board, because we're going to partner with Federated Farmers with the Farmy Army and actually get in there and get fences up and running. So we want the entire country to contribute to this campaign. We're kicking off with $655,000 today that I can announce, which is amazing, and that has come around through contributions from Farmlands, from Federated Farmers, from MPI, from Silver Fern Farms, from FMG, and from a number of our card partners. And this is just going to build across the coming weeks. We want everyone to share this everywhere, wide and far. And how it will work is that farmers in impacted areas will be able to apply for a grant. Those grants will be given to them $1,000 a kilometre up to $5,000 total grant at this point. Obviously, if we earn as much money as we want to, we'll be able to contribute more, and it's to be used specifically for the purchase of fencing or growing structure materials. So we all know exactly where it's going. And farmland's part of that as well is that we're making those products available at really reduced prices. So collectively, and this is what I love, this is the sector coming together collectively, business, sector, industry partners, and actually doing something real, tangible, making a difference, and not only helping our rural community with the challenge and struggles they've got in front of them, but actually really showing them that we're behind them. And the whole of New Zealand needs to do that, because there is nothing truer than rural is the backbone of this country. And for us to be able to show people that they really matter is critically important at the moment.
Thank you, Tanya. For those that don't know me, Andrew Hoggard, National President, Federated Farmers, or the grumpy farmer you sometimes hear in Stuff articles. Look, I just want to thank Tanya for launching this, inviting us to be part of it. We're very proud to be able to contribute to this, and we see it as a great way to assist with our initiative that we've got going again, the Farming Army, which, for those that are unfamiliar, that phrase was sort of coined back in the Christchurch earthquake, where the local farmers came into town and cleaned up, and then ever since, when there's been sort of disaster happen and there needs to be help given and clean up, and farmers want to help their neighbours or their, the next province over, that's the sort of tagline we've given it, and helped coordinate those actions to help people get their farms back together again. And just I want to emphasise, I guess perhaps not so much for the people in this room, but anyone that's listening online that isn't too familiar with farming, why is fencing so important? It's because it gives you control of your farming operation. Without those fences, animals can go anywhere, and particularly if it's a boundary fence, they can go really long places. After the 2004 floods, I know across the river from me, a number of neighbouring farms, they lost their boundary fences. One of them was a deer farm, and there has been plentiful venison in the freezers in the Kiwitea area ever since, because those animals escaped. And so that, just being able to fence off the damaged land, get the fences resurrected on the not so damaged land, it enables you to keep the animals moving, keep managing your pasture, and it's just so vital and important. It helps you make you feel like you're in control again, and you're making some progress, and things aren't so much of a mess. I know after the 2004 floods, for me, just that ability to fence off the broken areas, have things back to normal. I know I've still got this big mess that I've got to deal with elsewhere on the farm, but I know I've got control over the rest of the farm, and that certainly will help farmers' mental well-being in these sort of situations, knowing that they've got some control. So it's a great initiative to be part of, and once again, just thank all the other partners that are playing a part, and to the government for their initial response to the event of straight away coming out with the support for farmers to just get started on stuff. So much appreciated, and I hope everyone is able to contribute. So thank you very much.
Thanks, team. And yes, just a fantastic initiative, and staff are extremely proud to be supporting and standing alongside farmlands and federated farmers. And as I said at the beginning, I've just started in the new role at Stuff, and Kate Borum has joined me as Business Director for Rural, and the weight that Stuff and Sinead and the content team, and just their ability to now recognise the importance of agriculture in this way, and these new partnerships and great new content and great new initiatives, it's going to be an exciting journey, and we're super excited to be part of it. So thanks for that. I'd just like to now move on to the Stuff political panel and introduce Stuff's political editor, Luke Malpass, well known, and he leads our parliamentary press gallery that reports across our Stuff network and our website and our nationwide newspapers. Prior to that, he held leading various roles at the Australian Financial Review and the Sydney Morning Herald, and if he gets time, he'll tell you about the state of the Black Caps. He's very keen on that as well. Luke, my friend.
Thanks so much, Lee, and it's terrific to be here. If the rest of the panel could come up and have a seat, I think that'll probably be the best way for us to get into it. Thank you all for coming today. I live in Wellington. I'm not from Wellington. I love the place, but a day out of Wellington is a very good thing. So really chuffed to be here. And I'd like to welcome our panellists. We've got over at the far side there, Damien O'Connor needs no introduction, but I'll do a brief one anyway. He's obviously the Minister for Agriculture and Trade, long-time MP for Tasman, formerly West Coast, with I think a one-term hiatus maybe. And so it's terrific to have him here today to join us. We also, next to him, have Mark Cameron. Now, Mark has been in Parliament with ACT's larger team since 2020, and he's a dairy farmer from Northland. And also joining us is Ian McKelvey. He's been in Parliament since, I think, 2011, member for Rangitikei, and he's held various other positions, such as chair of the Royal Agricultural Society of New Zealand and various other positions in the rural sector. And look, what we plan to do today, and I'll hand over to Damien shortly, but basically we plan to cover a range of topics. And I believe the last time that this sort of event was held was in 2020 during the height of the COVID pandemic. Thankfully, the acute phase of that is now behind us, but a lot of the issues that has kicked up is now really what everyone across the nation, in particular the rural sector, is dealing with it at the moment. Obviously, the other challenges to the sector are coming into focus. The recent floods and the cyclone have, I think, given many people a taste of what a more climate-affected future might look like, and the choices that New Zealand will have to make in order to be more resilient and adapt to that new reality. On the mitigation side of that, of course, is Hawaka Eke Noa, the government's plan to start charging for farm gate emissions. So that's looming large over the sector. And despite high prices for many primary commodities, inflation has its claws into the farming sector, arguably more so than the rest of society. In addition, I think one of the interesting things from my seat in Wellington is how the politics of the sector seem to be evolving, and the emergence of groundswell in particular seems to have sharpened divisions within the sector over how some of these issues are dealt with. And as ever, the sector grapples with a Wellington machine that is not always especially responsive or understands what's going on. So, the broader backdrop to that, I think, is that New Zealand faces much larger issues, including inflation, still sticky supply chains, and despite farming doing its utmost to contribute, a current account deficit that at 8.9% is the biggest since modern records began in the late 80s. So there's much to discuss. We'll try and keep this session short, lively, make it really a conversation, and try and hand it over for any questions from the crowd as soon as we can, because although I can gibber about politics for ages, I'm sure these guys would much rather hear from you. So I'll begin with you, Damien. What do you think are the three biggest challenges facing the sector, and what are you guys doing about it?
Kia ora. Look, thank you very much. Thanks to Stuff and everyone for turning up. I think this is our first political panel in election year. The biggest challenges, I guess, self-confidence. One of the things that I do gain as I go around the world is a greater belief in the opportunities for us as a country. We have a strange situation that a smaller and actually decreasing number of people in our country produce more and the same, if not growing, percentage of the wealth. And so from a strictly democratic perspective, the ability to influence, some might say, is diminishing from a vote-by-vote basis. However, there is a widespread understanding that the primary sectors still drive the wealth creation of our country. The understanding of that on the ground is probably not as great as it could be. So too, rural people's understanding of what life is like in the cities. Don't know why you'd want to live there, quite frankly. But we have, a divide and more finger pointing now than we've ever had. Social media hasn't helped with that. We thought it might, but I think it's exacerbated the divisions and the different opinions. So actually, building confidence in our own belief that what we're doing is right, but just because we did it in the past to get us to where we are, doesn't mean to say that it can carry us into the future. Things are going to change. Disruption will be upon us. Every single thing I plan now, every bit of travel, every meeting, I think it will be disrupted. That possibility is there. As a rafting guide, I was always ready for someone to fall out of the raft. And it's almost like that in my life now. And I think that farmers kind of understand that. And I get calls for, give us more certainty. We need more certainty. My suggestion is go and work for an accountant, with all due respect to accountants. Nothing is certain in this world. And as you travel around, climate change is affecting every country. The monetary situation, the fact that we've had quantitative easing across the globe has upset every kind of economic theory that we can think of. The effect on food, the Russian-Ukraine situation, the effect on fertiliser and fuel, and how we deal with the real issue. Food security in Europe is not about food for Europeans, it's about how they feed the people in Africa and stop the social upheaval that might result from, the flow of refugees. What does that mean for New Zealand? We are so well positioned from just about every one of these things. Climate change has hit us. Terrible events there, but we have come together in the past through cooperatives, through collaboration, and we've got through those things. And we'll need to do that in the future. So the lessons of cooperation, I think, are understood. The lessons of innovation are part and parcel of our psychic. We just get on with it. And I think the opportunities as a food-producing nation, in a world that wants lower impacts, then that's where we have incredible opportunities. So that's my kind of intro, Luke.
Mark Cameron from ACT, obviously you and your family personally affected by the floods up north recently. Can you give us a bit of an update of what's going on up there, and what do you think the key challenges are for the sector and for people in your neck of the woods?
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, look, very quickly, for those that don't know me, I've been farming for 33 years in Northland, so actively farming. Came out of a cowshed, put a suit on and went down to Parliament to try and ameliorate what I thought were all the challenges that we as rural people are fronted by. Routinely we see, well I think, and so does my wider community, a social disconnect from what we do in the cowshed, in the wool shed, and outcomes, and it speaks to outcomes. Very quickly, Luke, you talk about the cyclone. Oh, gracious me, we were without power for 4 or 5 days. These episodic events are becoming more routine. How do we mitigate that, continue our farming practices with certainty? It's always interesting, and suffice to say, the Minister and I and Mr McKelvey debate these issues routinely. We had dozens of poles went over that feed the township. As far as I'm aware of today, we've got a generator powering several dozen homes. So this is going to be, and is currently, problematic. But I think the wider issue is where we get the conversation of all things rural back to outcomes. What are we seeking to do to ameliorate the issues on farm, mitigate our environmental footprint, because we all know human activity has one, but not marginalise the rural sector. Quite often, to speak to these climate events, the rural sector's the metaphorical poor cousin, you might say, when it comes to outcomes. Logistics support is often really hard to get in, and by virtue, you think of store lambs getting out or food getting in. We're often isolated for lengthy periods of time. So there's a lot going on, and I'll capture it like this by saying, why is it we have a 50-year low in morale? Now, I absolutely love rural New Zealanders for what we do, what we go out doing daily, and the challenges that we're confronted by. It would be nice, I maintain, without over-politicising the political, that the language in Parliament, in government, has an ear to the ground to that reality.
Thanks, Mark. And last but not least, Ian McKelvey. We're very fortunate to have Ian. We actually originally were going to have Todd Muller here today. He pulled out 2 or 3 days ago, and this morning he has announced his retirement from politics. So I think we all know that's the reason. And the thing I should have also mentioned at the top, was that Green MP Tiano Tuiono was scheduled to join us today as well, but he unfortunately had a last-minute clash that he couldn't avoid, so he's not here today. But very, very pleased to have Ian. Ian, obviously, what do you see are the big challenges coming up in your neck of the woods, and for politics of the land more generally?
Oh, thank you, Luke. I just want to welcome my two colleagues from the extremes of New Zealand to the centre. The wind capital of New Zealand, as you can well tell by going out the door. But I think the challenges are pretty obvious, and I think the most obvious challenge, and the minister sort of referred to it obliquely, is the fact that we need to have priorities in place so that we understand and we can enact. Because I don't think there's any doubt the agricultural sector's got the ability and wants to play its part in whatever role we see the country as the country that they need to play. But we need to have certainty around what we need to do, and we need to have priorities put in place to deal with those things. That's the first one I think is really important. And the second one I think that's really concerning the agricultural sector at the moment is the fact that, interestingly, we produce about 83% of New Zealand's cash. And without that 83% of New Zealand's cash, we ain't going to do much, are we? And so I think we've got to remember that. It's a hugely important part of the New Zealand economy. And successive governments over the last 30 years or 40 years of my life have tried to change that. We haven't succeeded 1 inch. In fact, we're producing more off the land now than we ever did. So that's the second thing I think that farmers want to be not recognised for, but I think we need to give credit to the sector for the amazing job they've done of keeping us afloat, certainly through both the GFC and the last 3 or 4 very challenging years. So those are the first two things I think are really important. The third thing I think is very cognizant in the minds of many rural New Zealand people, and that's the fact that our services are getting more and more diminished by the day. And so access to services, to education, to good education, access to health, and all those sort of things is very challenging for rural New Zealand, and I think that's another issue that particularly concerns the people. And if you look at the Rangitikei electorate, for example, we've got a whole lot of stuff out there that's miles from anywhere. And it's really important that those people have access somewhere in that electorate to those services. And just before I finish, I really want to commend the 3 organisations that came together to put that package in place for Hawke's Bay, because I think, well, not for Hawke's Bay, but for the flood victims, and I think that's pretty cool. And of course, we have practiced in the Manawatu, Wanganui, Tararua of exactly that on a number of occasions, and the only difference really between us and what's gone on in the rest of New Zealand now is that we didn't have that massive horticulture input in this area, and we're fortunate from that perspective. But I think it's very cool that the 3 organisations have come together to do that.
Thanks, Ian. Hey, the first thing I'd like to kick into quickly is Hawake Kanoa. I mean, whenever I basically get out and talk to anyone in rural New Zealand, any farmers, it's one of the first things they want to talk about. What's going to happen? What's going on? I'll start with you, Ian. Obviously, climate change has been a bit of a difficult area politically for the National Party. Todd McClay is going to be your new ag spokesman, I believe. But can you give some reflections of why there is that difficulty and where you think the National Party should be heading on this?
Oh, look, I think first thing I'll say is I don't think for a minute we want to go backwards in agriculture. We need to move. We need to move in a manner that at least keeps us in the game, and that keeps us in the game internationally. So that's the first thing we have to do. So there's no going back in agriculture. We've got to move forward. I think the problem with He Wakariki Noa is that farmers themselves didn't understand it, and still don't. And I think it's an extraordinarily complex way of going about things. And we've clearly got the technology in the world now to manage these issues in a different manner than we proposed. That's changing very quickly. And if you look at the ETS, which we support, and I certainly support it myself, it's just how we manage that ETS and how we manage the components of it that don't jeopardise New Zealand's future and ensure that we can participate. And as I said earlier, the thing that produces all the cash for us in New Zealand, in a manner that continues to do that. And it's no good thinking that we're going to cut food production by 20% in the world and feed a population that's increasing by 200,000 a day. But there's your answer.
Damien O'Connor.
Look, in 1997, of course, we as a country committed to include agriculture in our emissions, international emissions obligation, and so we've been working on that, talking about it for quite a while, and of course we tried that in the early 2000s with what was called the fart tax, and that was rejected by farmers, and so then the ETS was introduced, and it's been endorsed by the previous national government too. So then the question is, how do we fit in, it's not CO2, these are short-term gases, but actually they have far more impact on global warming. And so it's complex, and when we came in we said, look, we don't have the answers, so we'll hand this over to industry and all sectors can come together and come back with a plan. That was 2 years that they took. The fact that the farmers don't quite understand it is in part not their fault. It's quite complex, but that engagement, the opportunity for the sectors to have reached out and talked to the farmers about what was happening is I'm not blaming. The reality was that probably not enough of that occurred. So we came back with reports. Actually, there were still questions that the hard questions weren't answered. It's always the job of politicians actually to answer the hard questions. And so we've been working through with the industry sectors to try and come up with something that is workable, practical, affordable. But ultimately, there has to be some stick and carrot. There has to be some change in behaviour because McDonald's, because Nestle, because all those big multinational companies have obligations to reduce their impact and their carbon footprint.
And I mean, one of the figures that's been around that Ian referred to was, it will require a 20% reduction in stock levels over time. Is that your understanding? Will that be the case?
Part of the advice, and there was a bit of contested advice, but it came out and said it could be up to 20% loss in production. And that's of concern to us all. But that's in some, I said somewhat flippantly, but I don't believe that because I know how innovative we are. I was farming, share milking in the 80s when all those subsidies came off, when we had 70 million sheep. If someone, as Peter Elworthy, who was a leader at the time and said we have to take the subsidies off, if he had got up and said we can halve the number of sheep and still have the same production, people would have said absolutely rubbish. That's what we've done. And I know that through the innovative approach to Kiwi farmers, we'll get on and have viable farm systems and land use. But I'm not quite sure what that will be. I know a farm that was sheep, it went into dairy, and now it's in hops. Never say never, and I think what we have to do is provide the tools to farmers, and the money that we generate from He Waka Kanoa is actually it's not a stick. It will actually be just generating enough to go back into R&D and to come up with the innovations and then to assist with the rollout of those across our farming sectors.
Mark Cameron, you've been an MP that's been pretty critical of He Waka Kanoa, and the Minister says that, the sector will respond, innovation will carry the day. What's your view?
Well, firstly, I'm very collegial with Minister O'Connor, so we have our tit for tat all the time. Unequivocally, I agree but disagree, and so does the ACT Party. Interestingly enough, if we start today and we all reconcile, and our detractors certainly do offshore, places like Ireland who are sitting in parallel in the dairy space, you might say as an example, all agree, ag research here in New Zealand agrees that we are the most emissions-friendly farmers by the kilo of animal protein, food or fibre in the world. The logic therein is do we risk compromising that reality? The ACT Party is of the volition we don't. If it creates an environment which by virtue contracts our economy, our ability to be productive in the sector, and that productivity is picked up by offshore partners, the argument is then that we've actually increased our emissions footprint because this is a global problem. ACT's policy was to set our pricing alongside our 5 major trading partners. When they move, we move, by virtue of the logic I've just laid out. Now, that doesn't mean that farmers, to Minister O'Connor's point, that speaks to this continued innovation. Markets decide a lot of this stuff. And by virtue, so do farmers. Farmers wax and wane with where markets go. That will continue to happen. Farmers through the likes of Dairy NZ and Beef and Lamb are already paying levies. There is the capacity to fund that money into technologies, mitigation technology. And I think that where this ultimately lands is how does this story encapsulate science? We've discussed all things from boluses to bovea, food additives. There's a lot of legislative work to decide whether this is part of the Veterinary Medicines Act, in the instance of Bovere, is it an Animal Products Act, and where does that sit? It's all very confusing and convoluted if you're a farmer in rural New Zealand. We maintain today we're the most efficient in the world. Can we continue to prove? Absolutely. But I maintain, and the ACT Party maintains, it must not be on the back of economic contraction in the rural sectors. It hits rural people most.
And just quickly, because I'd like to open up for questions in a minute, but we'll stay with you first, Mark, because you've been in Parliament the shortest amount of time.
Yes.
What's the most challenging or frustrating thing about being a rural-based MP and dealing with Wellington, with Parliament, with the public service? What is it?
Yeah, thanks, Luke. Cowshed language is off limits, that's one thing. No, interestingly enough, is quite often, the building's full of really good people. We're all trying to do the right thing by New Zealand. We just have a different determination of how to get there. I think that's the first thing I would say. Quite often I've brought up anecdotes of on-farm things that we all know in this room. Damien knows them, Mr McKelvey knows them, but a lot of the politicians that I talk to, and some bureaucrats you might say in Wellington, aren't cognizant of what on-farm issues really sound like and feel like to us as farmers. And there's one anecdote I brought up, jumping up and down on a wall press in a fadge bag as a teenager in a Donald's press, and the eyes glaze over, Luke. So I think the thing is, really and truly, the frustration for me is quite often we as farmers lens things through pragmatism and outcomes. And sometimes I think there's a slight disconnection between what I say and those that think or seek to understand.
Ian McKelvey, what have you found over the years?
I think undoubtedly the most frustrating thing for me is that politics seems to prevent us from coming up with the solutions for the big challenges that New Zealand face. And I think climate change is a classic example of that. I think the ETS is another example of that, where we've struggled over the years to get agreement. We've now got there. And the obvious ones are health and education, which I think should be collegially made by the Parliament, never have been. And in my maiden speech I talked about that, and in my, if I get to live long enough to get out of there, I'll talk about it again when I go.
And lastly for you, Damien, obviously you're in a bit of a different position, being that you're, Labour Party MP, farmer's best friend. So how have, what are the things that you've found over the years?
I could start with a big long list of great things that Labour has done for agriculture, including Dairy Board, removing subsidies, setting up Fonterra, you name it, Zespri. Can I come back to the collegiality across the Primary Production Select Committee and most of the rural MPs, I think, is really, really positive. And we do have differences of opinion, but actually we know that the greater goal is really, really important. So we work together. Look, the reality is that we're in a world of a growing number of experts. We expect people to know more and more about things, whether it's your eye surgeon, or it's the person fixing your car. And so too we have people within the government agencies who are expected to be experts. So they can't know everything. And so I guess, they don't have the time. Most people in government work really, really hard, and they don't often have the time, as much as they would love to come out on farm and learn more, they simply don't or can't. And I think we've just got to build, that knowledge in the best way we can. And I think showing them that through cooperation and collaboration and with, I think, Stuff's initiative, that will be really, really good. And, we see, and I've made reference to rural media where, you're flat out on the farm, you come in, you see you picked up the mail, and there's a headline you see in Farmers Weekly or whatever, and you grumble about that, and then you go out on the farm for the rest of the afternoon without having time often to read the whole article because you're busy. And so, we're all busy, and we see the headlines on social media, and we don't have the time to really dig into the issues. So hopefully this initiative with Stuff will help people learn more about those issues.
Thanks, Damien. That was excellent. I've heard there's a job as police minister going. Maybe you should... Too soon.
No, can I have to say that that's not something they've ever thought of giving to me, because, and they will be quite smiling at National Driver Training Centre. They probably think I need to stay a bit more time, spend a bit more time here.
Right, we've got a roving mic around, I believe. I'd love to open it up for questions for 5 minutes or so. If anyone could raise your hand, and we'll get a microphone over to you. Go on, let's not do the classic New Zealand thing of...
We're all too nice. Come on, someone's got
We're all too nice.
Don't give the mic to him.
Hold on. And you'll go. Excellent, thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks. Mayor Grant Smith of Palmerston North City. Thanks for your discussion. It's been interesting. What's your view on GM? We, as a country, we feed 40 million people, but if we were to do more, genetically modified, what's your views on that? What's everybody's views?
Can I?
Oh, sorry. Look, acts of the volition, we've got to have a mature conversation as a country about what innovation looks like. We all accept climate change is something that's happening in all our lives, and equally the animal ruminant sector is part of the solution in that, and as is GM in that conversation. We've asked for the liberalisation around research and innovation to do with GM. Gracious me, Australia has, I'm of the understanding, liberalised its laws in 2019. I think we as a country have to do the same. We want to maintain our productive edge in the world. Now, the risk is that we may undo that. But equally, climate change is affecting all of us. How do we ameliorate that, remain productive? And I think, rather than the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, this is about innovation. GM is certainly part of that conversation and equation.
The international, challenge is not that realistic. We can feed 40 million. If we doubled our production, we feed 80 million. I don't know how many billion there is in the world today. A third of the food produced in this world is wasted. Right? That's a good place to start if we're talking about food security. A third of it. Come back to our position. I asked in London, the people selling our food, does being non-GMO give us an advantage, give you an advantage in the market? Hell yes. And so we're positioned in that place of greater value, which is the only place we can afford to be, because we're a long way from markets. So we have, and Te Puna Whakaronui has released a report. You've probably read it cover to cover. If not, you should. It's a very mature discussion document on this very issue, saying this is what's happening internationally. Here's a few points to think about. It makes no recommendations. So Lane Jager and a group of people have appointed are working through those future issues and challenges. So yes, I think we have to have a mature discussion, but it's not something for political debate, because it affects us all into the future. For existing farmers and producers and exporters, at the moment there's an advantage in being non-GMO. So if we trade that off, we have to know that we're going to get real advantage, not just extra production, because that doesn't necessarily give you more sustainable profit, and that's what most farmers need.
Ian, anything to add?
Oh yeah, very quickly, I've got 3 points really to make about that. One is I do believe it is a political discussion. You can't dodge the fact that it's definitely a political discussion, because it's not going to happen if the politics isn't sorted. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that I'm not about to announce National Party policy on this today. But the third thing, and I'll just give you an example of the huge value that this has got, quite aside from the health aspects of it, which it's being used for anyway. So we're prepared to compromise when we come to save ourselves, but not when we come to save our animals. But the really interesting examples in the forestry sector and with our wilding pines, the forestry sector would benefit massively from this in New Zealand if we could do that. Nothing to do with food. And I think that's a really good example of the value of this type of discussion and where we need to get to with it. We need to get there quickly, in my view. And wilding pines are another classic example of it. We could fix the problem with GMO.
Another question? I think we've got time for one more. You going to ask the same? Anyone? Oh, yep, there we go.
Oh, hi, Tina Morrison from Stuff. So I'm interested in your views of what's it like being a farmer in New Zealand at the moment.
I have shares in 600 or 700 acres, I think it is. We're making no money. It's a pretty rough bit of land, and I can't speak for it is on the West Coast, that's exactly. It's pretty hard, it's pretty challenging. Farmers, prices are not bad, but the costs have gone up. although they are coming back. Fertiliser and fuel in particular that have really hit agriculture hard. So farmers feel squeezed, and I can understand that. Interest rates have gone up as well. And so it's a tough time, but actually when you look at commodity prices, to expect them to keep going up is maybe a bit unrealistic. So how do we wind back our costs? And, you know, I do meet farmers who have got really low cost of production. And so things like milking once a day, which happens more often in Northland, innovative ways of reducing your costs on farm, not easy at all. And it will require change of systems often, but we have to help those farmers through those challenges, because we can't just expect that milk's going to go up to $12 payout in 5 years' time to cover the additional costs. And international inflation is rampant's not quite the word, but it's certainly been more than any of us want.
Let's talk about inside our jurisdictional boundary. Everything the Minister has said is true, but I maintain, avoided half the conversation. There's a lot of regulatory barriers that farmers jump through, metaphorical hoops of fire. I mean, gracious me, the number of farmers that say to me, identify the problem and then seek a solution, when they are throwing swear words at the government because they do not understand what the government's seeking to address. Now, there's a myriad of things. RMA reforms, they don't know what that will look like, proposed local government reforms. Then we've got all the things to do with fresh water, which affects on-farm practices and methodologies. There's a lot going on in rural New Zealand, and gracious me, if you actually try and reconcile a 50-year low of farmer morale attached to a very high payout, it can't all be blamed on foreign markets. Foreign markets change, they wax and wane, to use the words all the time. We're used to that as farmers, but we are now jumping through more red tape than we have ever done as the most productive farmers in the world, reconciling every day, for many of us, why we're still doing it. We've got to simplify the codes of practice and actually acknowledge, there's a good place, acknowledge the good work we're actually doing today, rather than risk undoing ourselves for platitudes.
Yeah.
I'll be pretty quick. If I'm home on a Monday morning, I get an ear bashing from about 7:15 to 8:15, and from then on they cheer up. So actually farmers have a lot to complain about and a lot of challenges, but I don't come across many farmers that don't love their lives. So I suppose that's a sort of an answer to the question. I think they love to love their lives, but they're also very frustrated for the first hour in the morning.
Well, I think we're basically at time now. So should I hand back over to you, Lee?
Thanks, Luke, and to the panel, and thanks for everybody for coming. I thought that politicians didn't get on, but that was very kind of, convivial, and you're kind of all mates. So I thought there might have been a scrap breakout, but no, they're sort of hugging. So anyway, on that note, that loving note for a Friday, again, thanks very much for coming. Particular thanks to Tanya and Andrew and Sinead for taking time to launch or post your support today. We've got some, looks like beverages there and a little bit of snacks, so we'd love to have a little bit of networking and a bit of a chat later. So if you'd like to do that, that would be great. Enjoy the rest of the field days and have an awesome weekend. Thanks.